Segment going up a little late today. Had a super busy day, but we're going to jump into and finish this week the last of the Patreon listener questions. We had a whole bunch, a big backlog, and I think we're done, at least for this week, with the Patreon listener questions. And once again, if you want to join the Transformer Slag podcast and our Patreon, help support the podcast and let us know that we're doing a pretty decent job keeping you informed about everything that's going on in the Transformer world and learning more about how our hobby functions deep in the woods. Check us out at patreon.com/protoman or check the description below or the pinned comment to get the link to come join us. What does the Patreon get you? Gets your name in the end credit scroll at the end of every segment moving forward. Gets you access to the Transformer Slag podcast Discord, our amazing Discord. What's on that Discord? Well, we have awesome chat, all kinds of stuff. News usually breaks there. On top of all of that, you get access to a whole bunch of rare Transformer lore to download, translated stuff, and the sales section where we keep track of all the sales that are happening around the world so you could save money in this hobby. Depending on what tier you are also in the Patreon, you might get a little package or a little present in the snail mail. I got something all planned out that happen in the next couple of weeks for my patrons of a certain tier. And of course, access to do here on the podcast, the Patreon listener question. We have a Patreon listener question from Space Ghostal. Space Ghostal wants to know, as much as I love the Generation 1 reboots over and over, I'm ready to have them move on so we could have leaders like Rodimus and Starsaber. Do you think they will always be Optimus and Megatron in this loop forever? Yeah, this is a question that comes up so much. And in all honesty, it's something that I would like too. The big issue that I think really happened is Transformers got good. And when I mean it got good, I mean it got good numbers. Every time Hasbro, Takara, whenever they really veered away from the norm was when sales were down. The reality is if it does well, why change it? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And as long as you have an Optimus Prime at the helm and a Megatron and the numbers are coming in solid, why would you change it? It's boring for us as fans, but there clearly is some kind of external numbers of casual fans, or just, I like to call them visitor fans, fans that come into the brand, buy some product, and then come back in a year or 2 or 3 years or 4 years. They'll always kind of lean on that. Now, usually what happens is when we reach a period where sales are just not doing good and using that Optimus Prime and that Megatron just isn't pulling in the numbers. And we live in a world today where it's not even a matter of a trademark reason because, you know, an Optimus Prime or a Megatron, they don't have to be the leaders of a main show because you know there's going to be Optimus and Megatron product coming from Hasbro. Takara, it's not so much a big deal with the trademarks, but Hasbro, you know there'll be something going on. You know, you could have 2 brand new characters be the leaders of the shows, and you'll still have an Optimus figure coming out from an RED line or a Studio Series line or some kind of movie direct kind of thing. They'll find a way to keep that trademark floating somewhere else for sure. Worst case, you throw them in bots or you throw them in rescue bots or whatever. There's always a place. So I do agree that it is possible and we don't have to worry about the trademark reasons because those 2 characters get at least a minimum of like, I'm pretty sure we could pull up the numbers just for like 2020, how many different figures they get across all the different lines each and every year. But that being said, I still think that they won't do it until things get dire. When we look at the Japanese side of things, the really first time that they deviated, and I'm not going to count Rodimus Prime's stint as leadership in 1986 for season 3, or alternatively for 1986 for Transformers 2010 in Japan, because those actually had 2 very different results. The season 3 audience in America was not very happy about Optimus Prime dying. It got a lot of bad press, and as a result, there was already plans set in motion to bring back Optimus Prime regardless if the fans enjoyed the character of Rodimus Prime or not. I will tell you this straight up, as a Rodimus Prime Hot Rod fan, people were not happy with him. Even when we get into the Beast Wars era, when there wasn't a huge pool of characters to pick from, Hot Rod, Rodimus, and Wheelie, they kind of were on that pecking order of of characters that they didn't like for one reason or another. Things have changed since then, but there was a very different time, especially back even as late as 1996. So Hasbro already kind of in their minds were scared to do something different. And that's why we kept getting Optimus Prime figures, even in non-show formats, whether it be a Power Master, an Action Master, a GoBot, a G2 version, multiple G2 versions. They knew what to do. They wanted to stick with that character, and they really did not visit that Hot Rod Rodimus character because from their perspective, it didn't work. The experiment didn't work to move on, and that was that. And I almost feel, and this isn't confirmed, and it never has been confirmed, but the feeling to move on was a bit of a Japanese influence. I feel that because Japan, internally from a storytelling standpoint, has no problem with introducing characters, and then when they run their course, popular or not, the story ends and they move on to the next chapter. Look at how the Power Ranger, aka Sentai stuff is done in Japan. Every year you're introduced a cast of characters and actors and everything, and insane sales or not, when it's over, and then they move on to the next thing. Same thing happens with their Gundam property. Same things happens with so many of their big properties, whether it be Ultraman or otherwise. They just do that. They move forward. And then, a couple years down the line, maybe you'll get a 10 years after Sentai thing, or they'll do some kind of, time thing where they'll do a sequel series or a prequel series using those characters, whether it be Gundam or something, the UC Century. But I don't want to get too far off from the Transformer thing, but it's just Japan has always been used to that, where it's always a marching forward in the next generation or something like that. So when you had stuff like Headmasters and Optimus Prime, a spoiler at this point, but the Japanese Headmaster series, when Optimus Prime dies and then Rodimus, bows out and goes to find a new Cybertron and leaves Fortress Maximus in charge, literally at around episode 11 and 12 of a 32 episode or 36 episode series, were thrown into a Fortress Maximus Scorponok kind of situation. And then with Master Force, we're thrown into initially a pretender kind of situation with Metal Hawk and Skullgrin, and then of course later on we get that of Devil Z and Deathsaurus, Deathsaurus and Overlord and Black Zarek. It's all over the place with Master Force. Devil Z is clearly the head honcho, but there is like a Emperor of Destruction kind of character, and then of course God Jinrai. Even though he looked like Optimus, it still was a different character. And then we get into like what even Space Ghost will mention here, like stuff like Starsaber, where here's Starsaber, brand new leader, different kind of gimmick, and then you have Deathsaurus, same thing, brand new villain, different kind of gimmick, and then you do the same thing with Zone. But these were all being done in Japan when things were a time to take risks, because they don't mind doing that. And it was only until sales were so low, specifically with Transformers Zone, did they do what America did, and they went, whoa, Zone didn't do well. We didn't even clear a TV series. We just had the one OVA. Let's do Return of Star Convoy. Let's do Transformers Battle Stars. And Convoy Optimus came back. Sales still didn't really hold very well. And Transformers kind of took a little bit of a nap. I mean, there always was Transformer product in Japan, whether it be Operation Combination, and then later on with the G2 stuff, but it just wasn't it didn't have the backing to have animated fiction and stuff like that. Little story pages here and there, or manga, but it wasn't until risks had to be taken that all of a sudden you could do different characters. And even then, when you look at something like the Beast Wars era, it's something where they went, we'll take risks, we'll do something different, but we still have to have an Optimus and a Megatron. It's those iconic characters. And, they didn't decide to call it something else. And in Japan, it wasn't even Optimus Prime. It was Convoy and it was Megatron. Like, they even hit it on the head even more. So, we call it Beast Convoy today, but it was Convoy. And as far as they were concerned, at least initially, it was the original Convoy, at least initially. So, it's hard for me to see them want to do it unless there's a big risk to do. Unless there's something where it's like, you know what, Optimus just isn't selling anymore. And I know the way Hasbro is. Like, if Transformers aren't selling well, they're not going to blame it on their leader. They're not going to blame. It's like if Spider-Man comics aren't selling well, they're going to try to figure out. Marvel will try to figure out what's wrong with the Spider-Man comic. They're not going to get rid of Spider-Man. They'll try to change the villains. They'll try to change this. But I think the unfortunate thing is we're always going to have an Optimus in some shape or form. And I know that, like, we even saw, like, Hasbro's like, oh, Robots in Disguise, 2015, Bumblebee's the focus. Yeah, that didn't take very long. It didn't take very long before Optimus was back, and it didn't really matter. I'd like to see a series kind of take a risk and do something different, because we can't really have the same thing over and over. But I feel that Hasbro right now is in this perpetual purgatory where they're trying to find the brand. They're really trying to find somewhere that the brand could sit comfortably. They really thought they had it at one point. Things were going great with the movies in 2009. Transformers Prime as a TV series had debuted the following year after that. So that was that kind of that Prime aligned continuity. They kind of had an idea of where they wanted to go with the brand and how it could evolve and move forward, both from a movie standpoint and from a television storytelling standpoint. Because even like Rescue Bots was part of that aligned continuity. Everything was synergized. But as time progressed and, lead managers changed and goals changed, it kind of became different. And, we look at, the War for Cybertron cartoons on Netflix and we go, where are we going to do something different? I'm hoping that Kingdom will be something different. But 6 episodes is not a lot to tell a story and to be different, unfortunately. And I don't want to go into it negatively, but I'm just, calling a spade the way I see it. So it's tough. It really is. It really is. And it's just me going like, I'm just trying to see where would that opportunity present itself? Where would something happen where Hasbro would then go, okay, you know what? We're going to take the risk and we're going to do something different. I could see Japan doing it. If Transformers ended up in such a low, which I don't think we'll ever be at that point again, but if we ever reach such a low where America just stops producing new Transformers content and Japan takes the reins again, then I could see it happening. I could see Japan maybe, initially it'll still be a Convoy and a Megatron, but then they'll do something different. Because, even when you look at like after Beast Machines, and they were restructuring the whole focus of the brand before they went into the Unicron trilogy. You had a Convoy, but it was Fire Convoy, and you had a Gigatron, not a Megatron, a Gigatron. Now, granted, when this was all brought over here as Robots in Disguise 2001, it was an Optimus and Megatron. You know how the trademarks work. But back then, they still even tried to be a little different. Even then, just a little different. But then, of course, Unicron trilogy, Micron, Armada, Megatron, Optimus, the same thing over and over again. It's tough. It is. It's a really tough one, and it's hard to say when Hasbro is ever going to want to roll the dice different. And again, I just feel that if you do want that to happen, it's going to be Japan that does it. It's just Japan always looks at brands in a very different way. You could hate on Transformers Energon, but Superlink, the Japanese version of it, the way it was being handled at the time in the Japanese audience was to aim it at a more adult audience, have characters that die, have there be more risks, have it be a little darker. It wasn't received well, but the point is that they were trying something different. They were trying something. They just didn't want to do the same cookie cutter, clean, kids cheering from the side kind of thing. They wanted to do something different. Didn't do well, and when we got to Cybertron and Galaxy Force, we were kind of back at square one with the 3 kids and cheering and Optimus, and death was not as common. So, long story short, to answer your question, I think we might be in that loop for a little bit until, let's say, Japan gets the reins and we'll see something different. Because, again, you just got to see how they handle all their other major brands. And they pull that off. But, again, that's that audience. And we are really secondary. Where Transformers, unfortunately, at the end of the day, really is a American brand first and a Japanese brand second, even though its origins might say otherwise. So I hope that answers your question, Space Ghostal, and I'm curious what other people think. Would they like to see something different, or do they feel that Optimus and Megatron really is just the safer bet every time, and maybe they could just focus on fixing the story rather than changing the characters? It's a tough one, but if you want to join the Patreon, like Space Ghostal, and ask a cool question that could be fleshed out like this, and we could really go into some deep thinking, patreon.com/protoman. Check the description below. Check the pinned comment. Click it. Come join us. And let us know what you think. Support the podcast. And tomorrow is stream day. Live stream, Transformer Slag, Saturday night. Hope to see you there.